Great Depression. So this video is going to focus on the effect of the Great Depression on the German people. So last video we talked about the effect of the Great Depression in the United States, and this time we're going to talk about the German people leading into the conditions that allowed Hitler to come to power in Germany. So the title of this video is The Great Depression in Germany. It's focused on Stage 2 Modern History, Key Area of Inquiry 1, the causes and impact of the Great Depression. Last one! So after World War I, Germany had some significant economic problems. They had huge problems with inflation and they had a real economic crisis post-World War I. Now by the late 1920s, they had somewhat recovered from this. They were doing well because they relied on short-term loans from the United States. So what had happened is because of their issues, they had borrowed significant amount of monies from United States banks. They actually borrowed £9 billion from United States banks to help recover them. This probably equates to about 15 billion Australian dollars. Now what we know with the Great Depression is that once the United States hit their significant economic troubles, the banks were in huge amount of trouble, so they started to recall their loans. They said, sorry, we can't allow you all that time to pay them back, you got to pay us back now. So the United States recalled all of the money that they had loaned to Germany to help them recover from their economic disaster. This was a huge, huge problem for Germany because the loans were supporting industry and businesses in Germany at this time. And so when those loans were recalled and that support was lost, there were many, many business closures across Germany. So in Germany, like with many other nations at the time, including the United States, exports slumped. No country could afford to import goods from another country at this time, so Germany had nobody to export to create income. Millions of people lost their jobs due to closures, and there was hunger, poverty and homelessness, as with many other countries who were suffering from the Great Depression. So at the time that the Great Depression hit, Germany was under a new government. This government was known as the Weimar government, and they had already been through a significant economic crisis post-World War I. So they had no idea what to do when the Great Depression hit because they were scared of inflation. They didn't want to lower taxes, print more money, because that would lead to a great inflation crisis like they had already experienced, and they were terrified of that happening again. So what they did was they raised taxes, they cut wages, and they reduced unemployment benefits. And this is an extremely unpopular decision with people who are being laid off, suffering from the Great Depression, suffering hunger, homelessness, reduced work hours. And what they do is they ask them to pay more taxes, they ask them to take wage cuts, and they give them less unemployment benefits. This was what the Weimar government did to the German people, which made them suffer even more through the Great Depression. There were some specific groups in Germany that suffered greatly during the Great Depression. The first group to suffer more than most were young people. There was a huge proportion of young people under the age of 30 that were unemployed. Over 60% of people who graduated from university during this time could not find a job, and by 1933, over 50% of people between the ages of 16 and 30 were unemployed. So this created a huge problem because these are people who are looking to move out of home. They're probably young married couples that might be starting to look to start a family, and we've got unemployment crisis in this group. The other group that was hit hard was farmers because demand was reduced because people weren't spending as much money even on the essentials such as food. Prices fell and farmers couldn't sell their produce for as much, so they fell further into debt as well. Of course, businesses suffered greatly at this time because they had reduced production, they had reduced exports, they had higher taxes, reduced spending, people weren't buying their things, so they suffered. They either closed due to withdrawal of support from the United States loan, or they closed because of reduced spending. The other group that suffered greatly were factory workers. There are a lot of factory workers in Germany at this time, and over 40% of factory workers were unemployed in Germany by 1933. They lost their jobs due to closures or because there was significantly reduced production in these factories at that time. The other important point to discuss about the impact of the Great Depression in Germany is the psychological effect it had on the people. They had a newly established government in the Weimar government, and they weren't handling the situation well at all. Of course, they made unpopular decisions such as raising taxes, cutting wages, reducing the unemployment benefit, and they really had a wait and see approach because they had no idea what to do. So they just thought, it'd all come out in the wash and we'll just have to wait and see and we'll just get through it. This desperation that people were experiencing because of hunger, homelessness and poverty led to a lack of confidence in the current government structure. Remember, this is a population that has been used to an autocratic system with one strong leader in Kaiser Wilhelm before World War I. And so this new democratic government that has already put them through an economic crisis after World War I and now are mishandling another one, this hardened public opinion towards the Weimar government. They were seen as a conservative government. They weren't doing much. They didn't really know what to do. And because of this increased support for extremist parties who offered to do something. They were going to save Germany. They were going to do this. They were going to do that. And even though it seemed extreme, at least they were going to do something. So this greatly increased support for extremist parties such as the National Socialist Party. So that's it for our series on the Great Depression. We've talked about the condition of the United States economy in the 1920s. We've talked about the causes of the Great Depression, and we've talked about the impact of the Great Depression both in the United States and in Germany. This has all been leading on to our next series, which will be about the rise of Hitler and the Nazi Party to power in Germany. Make sure you subscribe so you can keep up with that one, and I'll see you next time. Bye!